super producer Anthony Haney, dancing his face off. I'm merely Craig Hoffman, host of the show, sitting in a chair very calmly. So the Washington Wizards season is over, which honestly, Ant, yay! Normally that's a boo. We want more basketball. I think for this season's Wizards, everyone has had enough. Denny Avia had a post that started with like a black and white photo, and you're like, yeah, that's the kind of season it was. Kyle Kuzma's on Twitter asking for brunch recommendations. He's going to be spending more time in D.C. this offseason. So he's like, I need to know where to go for brunch. So look for a very, very tall man at your local brunch spot. A couple of good recommendations. I did favorite that post because I'm like, where's everyone else going for brunch? I got to make sure I don't lose out on any recommendations. But we have burning questions, non-brunch affiliated, to answer in terms of the Wizards season. Where would you like to start, producer of this show?
I think we can start, simple. What would you say was your biggest takeaway from the season that was?
My biggest takeaway from the season that was for the Wizards is that they are farther away than I thought, which is saying something because I thought they were pretty far away. But I also thought that they would, look, I have to own it. One of the worst predictions I've ever said was that the Wizards would cruise past their over on the Vegas win total this year. Jordan Poole's numbers compared to what Bradley Beal's were the last couple of seasons were pretty comparable. And so I'm like, well, they'll at least win like 35. That's kind of what they've been. Obviously, Porzingis was a huge factor in their success last year. But Kuz and Poole, like, guys like Kispert, Denny, taking steps, like, they got enough to win 35 games. Like, they're not going to be good, but they're not going to be terrible. And very quickly we find out that they were terrible. I still think it's weird because I actually don't know how bad they are, in part because their extraordinarily terrible stretch, a.k.a. the first 50 games of the season, between Wes Unseld and some confounding coaching stuff, and the biggest factor being Jordan Poole's incredibly lackluster play. Well, if Jordan is the guy that we saw the last month and a half of the season, like they're not as far as they looked in January. I'll put it that way. But clearly, I think the biggest takeaway for anybody coming out of the season has to be that they are simply farther away from, forget contention, from like playoff contention than we thought coming into the year.
Would you say like 2, maybe 3 years?
I think it depends on what they do this offseason, right? Okay. Like if all of a sudden Koulibaly makes the French team or doesn't, but has a productive summer, right? His goal is to make the French national team. He would then play in the Olympics at home in Paris, which would be awesome for him. It'd be a great experience. I think that French team can compete for a medal for sure. Obviously, you got Gobert, Wemby, like Bilal, like that's a pretty nasty team, as well as some others. Does Tony Parker be like, I think I have a little more basketball left in me. I would like a medal. They've got other guys though that are good and are going to help them compete with the U.S. and Spain and Argentina and some of the other powers in global basketball. But or he goes to summer league and hopefully he has one of those like, okay, you're going to play 3 games and dominate everybody and then shut it down because you're clearly better than all the rest of these dudes here. So you got that with Bilal. Denny continued to grow throughout the year, and by the end of it, like he's a bona fide NBA starter. Kuz talked today about he's got to come back in better shape, like he thought he was ready to go, and then you realize the burden night to night of being the guy comes with a even different level of conditioning than being in good NBA shape. And there were times this year where he got sloppy late in games, and that comes from fatigue. So his understanding of that, I think, is a great sign that he's going to come back better next year. And then the biggest factor is, like, what is Jordan Poole and what do they do around those guys? Like, do you wind up signing and trading Tyus Jones, or you try to run back a Jones-Poole backcourt that makes absolutely no sense, even if I like both players individually? So I think those, like, they could be in the playoffs next year. I don't think that they will, and I think that's a conscious choice to keep an eye on the long term and not try to shortcut it and sign some guys that could help them make the playoffs next year when they're not really a part of the long-term plan.
Nah, for sure. And you talked about Koulibaly and the growth that he's had this season. Who would you say, also took some steps in the right direction or are just like overall bright spots, following this season that we had?
So Koulibaly is undoubtedly the biggest bright spot, right? He was so much better than everyone thought he would be. People thought he was going to split the year between the G League and the regular Wizards because he had barely played top French level basketball. Like, this is a dude that, when we're talking in January and talking about how well he's doing, with the phrase a year ago he was in the French second division was a true statement. It wasn't until late in last season that he got up on the team that Wemby was on over in France in the first division. He was a second division French teenager who then was able to get as an 18-year-old onto that first division team, and then all of a sudden was in the NBA and playing like real NBA defense and attacking closeouts and making threes at a clip that nobody saw coming. So how advanced he is already is the biggest bright spot where you're like, oh, I wonder if they got one of their 3 stars, like maybe even the second. It feels unlikely he's the first, but crazier things have happened. The crazier thing that has happened is Giannis Antetokounmpo exists. But like, are you talking about a Giannis-y type of trajectory here where all of a sudden we're looking up in 2 years being like, oh my God, this guy's an all-star? I think it's not a realm of possibility, although I think he probably winds up just below it unless he hits another growth spurt. So Koulibaly is undoubtedly bright spot 1. As weird as this is to say, I think the other most significant bright spot in the season is Poole didn't tank until the end. We're going to talk about disappointment, so we'll save more on Poole for a second. But the fact that he didn't finish like he started and he had a 20-plus point, 8-plus assist month and a half to end the season, that's important. Other than that, Kispert, big positive year. Avdia, I think, had a really, really, really good year. And the other guy that I'll throw out, like those guys were kind of did the thing that we hope they would do, like continue to grow into bigger roles. I don't think they're stars. Maybe they're starters. I think on a championship team, if they're your 6th and 7th guys, like you're in amazing shape. But either one of them could be a spot starter or a regular starter with the right people around them. I think one of the best moves they made this year is getting Marvin Bagley. They played the first part of the year without a functional big man in the lineup in the ways that they needed. Gafford was good, but he was hurt a lot. And once Bagley got here, and the thing is, like, actually, I shouldn't even say that about Gaff. Gaff was actually really good for the time that he was here. He was probably the best player in the first 50 games of the season, not named Kyle Kuzma. But they had no depth. And so there was like 2 weeks where Bags and Gafford were here together, and they like had a respectable 2 weeks because they actually had proper big man depth. And then was like 5 games, it felt like, where Bagley and Rashawn Holmes were healthy, and they like did okay in those games. So, you look at the roster construction and you go, okay, if Holmes is a good player, which he looks like he might be, and Bagley's a good player, which he might be, you're actually not as far up the creek as you thought. You just got to find a ways to send those guys home for the summer with a plan to get them through next year healthy, because they're potentially NBA starting caliber bigs or really good bench bigs. But then the question is obviously like, what do you do around them? And that gets into the how far are you question.
Yeah, I definitely love the Marvin Bagley addition. Also, I like the kid Tristan Vukcevic when he did play.
Yeah.
I think he was definitely a bit of a bright spot to me because we finally got to see him play. We took him in the second round. And
he's a real NBA player.
In limited minutes.
If you get a real NBA player in the second round, you've won. Like, that is the nature of those. Like, sure, the real winning is getting Draymond Green, who's going to the Hall of Fame. Like, that's sick. Vukcevic is not going to go to the Hall of Fame. It does. I doubt. I mean, who knows? I'm not going to write the kid off because he played like 5 games this year. But he played, and he was good. Like, he can play in the NBA now. And now he's going to go to Summer League and go through his offseason, like understanding, like I'm really happy they got him that taste because now he knows what he's got to do. And if he can add some size and some bulk and, some skills or like polish the skills that he knows are going to make him really good, like that's a potential future starter right there. So that was a hell of a pick who's paying off. So like, I will say this, Dawkins and Winger come from that OKC thing or that OKC program where they just figure out how to draft the right dudes all the time. Their 2 draft pick, like say what you want about Poole, say what you want about any other acquisition or trade or whatever they made. They got 2 draft picks so far as the head of the Wizards. One of them's Koulibaly, and the other's this Vukcevic kid. And I have that so far as a very significant 2 for 2.
Yeah.
And we'll see. I mean, another bright spot could be the draft lottery if they can win that. And then we'll see what they do with that pick. It's the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980. We're always live as well on the free Odyssey app. We'll take some calls on the Wizards next. Plus, that was a very positive Wizards segment. It's just kind of how our questions fell. We saved a little extra time for some of the disappointment. So we'll get into what went so horribly wrong next. It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and always live on the free Odyssey app. We're talking about the Washington Wizards. We'll talk WNBA draft coming up at the top of the hour. Who are the Mystics eyeing at 6? And just how hard is the transition going to be, even for Caitlin Clark, arguably the best player in the history of the college game, certainly the best of modern times at that guard position. But how hard is the transition to the W game? Sabrina Merchant of The Athletic has written about both of those things, and she will join us at 6 p.m. But Anthony, we got the positives out of the way. We talked about the bright spots. We talked about how close are they and had a realistic discussion. What's your next question about the Wizards?
Oh my gosh, Craig.
They finished their season yesterday with the NBA's second worst record. Yikes.
You got to start with the good and then end with the bad.
Okay.
And here, I'm here to ask you, what were the biggest disappointments from the season this year? And don't forget the Wes Unseld firing as well.
Yeah, I would say I have 2 major disappointments. One is the coaching job that Wes Unseld did. I guess, well, that is multi-tiered, so I'll save that one for a second. The first is just, it's related to that, is Jordan Poole. I mean, and it's not so much like you're disappointed in Jordan as a person, because I understand that guy worked his tail off all year and that we saw results at the end, that wasn't lip service from everybody over at the Wizards who, no matter who you asked over there, would tell you he's a great kid, he's working hard, we're really hoping that it turns around for him. He put in the work, and the last quarter of the season, he got terrific results. Solid shooting percentages, 23 or 22, I think, wound up being the number-ish, points per game. The free throw shooting came back. He was 90+% from the line during that stretch, which was like another awkward, weird thing that he wasn't hitting free throws. Like, this dude would take technicals over Steph Curry in Golden State. He was that good of a free throw shooter. And so, like, to know that he put in the work is great, but you still have to go. He played like 50+ games of pretty terrible basketball, which, again, I don't say as a shot at him personally. I mean to just give you the raw analysis of, oh my God, that was awful basketball. From the missed shots to the turnovers to the just incomprehensibly bad defense. And I remember, and we were talking about it in the middle of the season on the show, and the question I would ask, and I don't think there is a good answer here, is if I'm Jordan Poole, watching Jordan Poole on tape play defense, do I think that I'm doing a good job? Because there were just times where you're like, that's not good enough from an effort standpoint. That's not good enough from a technique standpoint. Like, you have got to be able to make it, at least don't, if you give up a drive, don't give up a straight line drive. Like, just be a bit of a nuisance. Make the offensive player pretend like you are there, like you exist. And I think that then folds into the coaching part of it. I like Wes Unseld Jr. personally a lot. I think he's a very smart basketball mind. I said all this stuff when he got fired. But he did just a ridiculously bad job this year. And I know it's one thing to say, like, they weren't trying to win. But ultimately his job is to try to win. And that involves not only strategy and mixing up defenses and doing some things, but it requires one, first and foremost, the thing that he got fired for was a lack of accountability. And guys like Poole, who were not playing up to their level, not for shots not going in, or, I do think it took Jordan a long time to kind of cope with the trade and how everything went down with the punch in Golden State, like all that stuff. Like, I just think as a human being, I have such a high level of empathy for Poole, especially seeing how it ended, where you're like, no, like he still got it in there and he was working through it, right? So, but beyond that, like there just wasn't a level of accountability for bad play, bad decisions, poor performances, and the symptom of that was nothing ever changed. No lineup changes, no nothing outside of injuries, and the rotation stayed the same. And it's just like, hey, this is a season where you're trying to try stuff, and that's why I was so happy to hear Will Dawkins, when they moved on from Unseld, say like we're now in kind of experimentation season. And Brian Keefe is going to try a bunch of stuff. And they try different defenses. They try different offensive strategies and roles and put the ball in different guys' hands. And ultimately, they put the ball in Jordan's hands. And it's like, duh. My God, you play the point guard at point guard, and he produces like he used to at, point guard. And so I think that just the incredibly poor, like, and I'll even use this word. This is the word I think I like the most for it, Anthony, is it's an inexplicably bad job by Wes Unseld over the first 50-plus games. And I say inexplicably out of respect for Wes. He's too smart and too good of a person and cares too much and, like, is too thoughtful and too well-respected to do the job that he did. It made no sense. And that stacked loss after loss after loss. And I give a lot of people around the organization credit for keeping it together. And then ultimately Winger for making the move, and Dawkins for making the move. And Brian Keefe, I don't know that it's one of the things I want to find out this week on the show, is we'll have some guests on to talk about it. Like, should Brian Keefe be in consideration for this job, considering he only won, 8 games? I think they were 8-31 in his 39 games, but they were definitely more competitive. They definitely played smarter basketball, and they were hurt for a lot of that. And so it just comes down to the talent deficit. They got beat by better teams on a consistent basis, but at least they competed. And so I think when you look at the disappointments, it's Poole's performance in a vacuum, and then the decision-making and the lineups and all of the coaching job, that it was inexplicably bad from Unseld, that leads you to having the second worst record in the league. Those, to me, are the two, like, outstanding disappointments.
Yeah, and I think on the coaching front, the accountability piece, I think that was the biggest part, just because guys aren't being held accountable. They're just going to, keep doing the same thing over and over again, and it's going to continue to result in loss after loss after loss. And eventually you end up being that team that you tweeted out that you didn't want to end up being that team. So,
yeah.
What a season, man. What a season.
Can I do one more disappointment? And this is going to be a bit of a wacky, but I'm going to do it anyway.
Sure.
As media members, one of the things that you strive to get is access, right? Like, it's really nice when a team is like, yeah, come in, or we'll tell you this thing. And specifically, there's a kind of access you get as a features reporter that is different and special. And when it's done right, you have no idea the reporter's there till the thing comes out, and then the reporter paints a complete picture of the time that they spent with the subject, period, right? And so the best example of this in recent journalism is Wright Thompson's piece on Caitlin Clark. It is unbelievable journalism from he got access to her for a lot of the year. He was able to stop in and out of the Iowa program. The coaches talked to him. He got to go to Caitlin's birthday dinner with her parents. There was a ton of access, and the story that Wright Thompson wrote was unbelievably good. It is so worth your time if you haven't seen it yet. Then there's whatever the ESPN reporter did with the Wizards. He got 8 days of full access. He got to go to work with Michael Winger, someone that we've been trying. This is not a shot at the Wizards. Winger's trying to hang back. I get it. We're hoping to have either Michael or Will later on in the week. But we would love to have Michael Winger on and to be able to ask questions and to go behind the scenes in practice and all of these kinds of things, to get the kinds of access that this feature reporter did with the Wizards. And he published a story last week that basically hadn't been updated since like February 15th. We talked about like there was just this unbelievable like downtrodden version of Jordan Poole that was maybe accurate when the story was reported in late January, right before Unseld was fired. And there were some interesting tidbits and like there was some good stuff in there, but it just ignored the fact that the last month and a half existed where like Poole turned it around and was scoring 23 to 25 a night and 8 assists, and his turnovers were down and the shot selection was better and the Wizards were competing and the vibe around the team was different. Like, it just ignored all of that. And it was freaking weird, man. So, yeah, that's not to, like, defend the Wizards or anything. Nobody asked me to do that. I read that story and was like, what the bleep is this? This is a stupid use of really valuable real estate given to a reporter who just totally screwed it up. So, yeah, that was my other disappointment. I thought when I saw the headline, we were going to get a really cool insight into the Wizards, and instead we got one that was 2.5 months old.
No, I feel you on that one.
That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
What's up, kiddos? It's your boy Clinton Yates from ESPN. It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980. Tell your mama I said what's up.